Good morning, everyone. My name is John Liston, and I have the great privilege of being the Executive Director of Serra. Thank you all for being here, for what you do for Serra, and for stepping up and taking a leadership role. And leadership roles in Serra range from being a Serran who is a member of a committee, all the way up to being a past international president of the organization and run the whole show. And every level of leadership is important. So the purpose of today's meeting is to introduce you to a few of the resources that are available to you as Serra leaders, to talk about the structure of our organization, talk about what boards do, because those are the vehicles that our leadership drive, talk about conflict, how we manage it, have a very important conversation about policy, because most clubs have kind of informal policies, and we always encourage a written policy document that gets reviewed and updated in a timely fashion so people know and future generations can benefit from your wisdom. And then we're going to talk about Robert's Rules of Order, because that's going to be the most exciting thing we can talk about. So in terms of the resources that you have as leaders in Serra, the person to your left and the person to your right are great resources. Everybody here has a deep love of this organization, a knowledge of the church, and things that can help you be more effective in what you're doing for Serra. We've also got a couple of websites that are very helpful. The Serra International website has some general information about the organization, our history. The serraus.org website, maintained by the U.S. Council, has a wealth of information, be it program modules, links to the various training sessions that have happened, and all of those. The website was also just redone this year, and I'd like to thank Mike Downey, because he put a lot of work and a lot of thought into how that site was built and developed to make it more effective and more user-friendly for you. The Serra staff, well, that's what happens when you come late to a Catholic. So, Serra staff, we are really blessed to have a wonderful but small team supporting the entire organization. That includes Barbara Luster, our membership coordinator, Giovanna, our administrative assistant, and starting on July 1st, Ann McCormick, who's a name that might be familiar to some of you, will be returning as our full-time communications person. So the office in Chicago, it's 4 people, but we got knowledge, and if we don't know how to do it, we can probably direct you to the person who can. So those are some of the resources, and also the latest tool added to the Serra arsenal is Club Express. You'll be hearing more about that this week, and there's also a number of videos online. But that is our new membership management tool. There are ways where you can email all of the individuals in your club. You can send to just the boards. You can create events. You can process registrations. Everybody here who registered for this convention registered through Club Express. So there's a lot of great things you can do with that, including use the document library. And that's a place where you can store your bylaws and your policy manual. So we've got a lot of tools that you can use, and you're going to get a lot of great information throughout this convention on how to use it. Next, I'd like to talk about the structure of Serra International, because as they say, you kind of have to know where you stand to know where you're going to sit. And from a formal standpoint, Serra International is organized, everything falls under the international board, and then below that there are the councils or regional trustees that oversee areas without councils. Most councils have districts, well, all councils have districts. In the US and Brazil, we also have regions, and then we have the Serra clubs. That's how we look from an org chart top down. From a functional standpoint, really everything happens at the club level. That is our basic operating unit. And one of the things that I really credit the founders and the organizers of Serra with is how well our organization mirrors the structure of the church. In that there's the Holy See, and they do great things, and they set policy, and they think the big thoughts. But in terms of where you get baptized, where you get married, where you receive Jesus every week, that happens at the local unit. And that's true for Serra. Everything happens at the club level, and everything exists to support the Serra clubs, because that's where the work of the organization gets done. You'll also notice there are solid, and I don't know if you can see the dots, but there are dotted lines between every level of Serra, because there's formal communication that should flow from the club to the district, to the council, or to the region, to the international board, and then there's a lot of informal communication. And while there are times when this structure is followed, a lot of times there is informal communication where someone who is a club VP of membership will call the office with a question, and Barbara will be able to take care of that because she knows the answer. You don't need to go through your district governor, to your regional director, to the council president, to me, to go back to Barbara, because while that's technically how it should flow, we understand the reality of it and the efficiencies of giving Serrans that access and kind of flattening the org chart in that way. So the role of the board. So this is where Serra International's bylaws define what the board does and what the responsibilities are. And really, this holds true for every level of Serra, again, whether you're at the club, district, region, or council level. As a member of a board, you're responsible for the overall affairs of the entity and what powers are given to you by the Constitution and bylaws. You're there to make sure that things are going efficiently and to make sure that we are maintaining our focus on the objectives and purposes of Serra. So it's a difficult balance to delegate and to lead. And oftentimes we have great members on boards who say, I want to do this program and I'm going to run it and I'm going to be the person who does it. And sometimes that makes sense, and other times if it's a program that we want to continue doing for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you want to have a team, you want to have a committee, you want to have a group, one, to share that responsibility, because if you have a single point of failure in an organization, odds are there could be something unexpected that happens. And two, because there are so many brilliant people in this organization, including all of you in this room, who can add ideas and who can help shape and improve things. So as a board member, you need to lead, you need to delegate, and when you delegate, you need to trust the people you're delegating to. So you can share your wisdom with them, give them suggestions, but also understand that you assign them this task for a reason, and if they're the person to do it, then they should be able to do it in the way that they think is best. And if things happen and that needs to change, then you should discuss that with the board, and the board should make that change if necessary. So boards are all about planning for the future, because we can do what we're doing today without any issue. But we're celebrating the 90th anniversary of Serra right now this year, and the reason we are doing that is because we have had great leaders who have made plans. They say if you are sitting in the shade of an oak tree today, that means 30 years ago somebody planted that. And that's what we want to do for the future generations. So your thought needs to be on a much grander time horizon than what are we doing today and what's good for right now. We need to look at the bigger picture. And Serra is very much a long-term organization. I think the people who have really been nourished have had the experience of meeting a young discerner, talking to them, maybe giving them one of the Serra Challenge coins, introducing them to the vocation director, meeting them when they first come out to the seminary, working with them, maybe having them as a deacon in their parish later on, attending the ordination, and seeing them come into the fullness of their vocation. That's the great joy of Serra, and that only happens through planning and through thinking about what we do in the future. So, monitoring finance, talking about that filthy lucre. The board is the fiduciary agent and responsible for how the clubs spend money. We live in a world where there are so many needs right now, and everybody has an idea for a program that's going to revolutionize this, do that, and we only have so much that we can invest as Serrans. So as a member of the board, it's your job to give your insights and input into, is this a good use of our funds? Does this further our mission as Serra? And is this going to help position us in the future to continue doing what we need to do right now? We have the Serra International Foundation, is a great example of that, where there is an investment corpus, and then we rely on the generosity of Serrans and others, but oftentimes we will need to draw on the interest from that corpus in order to fund certain grants or maintain operations. And that's the money that we have for that reason, because we need to know what's going on in the future. In terms of audits, that's probably too strong of a word for your typical Serra club. An audit, it really can just be having a third party review the accounts every year and making sure that the treasurer, we wrote a check to the seminary for this, the check went out to the seminary, everything's good. A second set of eyes is wonderful, not because we don't trust people, but because sometimes mistakes happen and we want to verify that everything is correct. So, at board meetings, the way you conduct yourself reflects the organization. If you want to have a serious entity, you should be serious at the meetings and you should run the meetings with proper decorum. Everyone has a responsibility for making sure the meetings are efficient and effective. And oftentimes you will have an idea during a board meeting on, if we rearrange the agenda this way, this might work better, we could do this, we could do that. But raising that in the middle of the board meeting while the president is talking about the minutes or something else might not be the time for that. It also may invite everyone else to share their ideas about how to improve the board meeting, which is okay, but that's not what should happen during the meetings themselves. So knowing when to have the offline communication versus when to bring things up in a board meeting is important. For those of you who are president, it's your job to chair the meeting. That doesn't mean you decide everything, but it does mean you set the agenda and you try to keep the meeting moving towards order, towards getting the votes out and understanding what the will of the organization is so we can move forward to accomplish that. Board member responsibilities. You gotta be at the meetings. That's a big thing, and in the age of Zoom, a lot of people feel like, I can just pop in, but there's a reason why we're not doing this convention virtually. I could do this talk on Zoom, we could put it on YouTube, you could watch it later. I don't like that for a variety of reasons, and one of the big things that I really enjoy about coming to conventions and going home from conventions is the quiet time in the car, on the airplane, thinking about, wow, I didn't realize that cardinal came from the Latin word for hinge, and Cardinal Collins shared that with us last night. I got to have a great conversation with Ken, and I'm going to follow up with him about that program he talked about, so you can kind of put things together mentally. And if you're just jumping from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, a lot of that gets lost. So preparation, taking part in the discussions, cooperating with board members is important. That doesn't mean you need to get along. That doesn't mean you have to like everybody. You have to love your neighbor, not like them. So you've got to cooperate for the good of the organization. Understanding parliamentary procedure. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about Robert's Rules of Order later on. And also, there are a lot of traditions and practices in Serra that, for someone who's new to the organization, you might not understand why we do that. Ask the question. Sometimes there's a great reason as to why things are done a certain way. It's a tribute to either a bishop or a Serran. Sometimes some people say, it's just the way we've always done it, and we don't know why we haven't done it a different way. So asking those questions is important. And then working together is key. And finally, we want to really focus on what do we do as Serrans? What is our mission? How is this helping our members grow in holiness? How is this fostering and affirming vocations moving forward? As I mentioned, meetings are set before they even begin. So reading the materials, looking at the agenda, and if you have questions, it says staff there because this presentation was originally for just the international board. I realized that by the time they got to that level, it was too late for some of them. So they opened it up for everybody for board training. But if you have a question about the agenda, ask the president. It says international convention on there. What does that line item mean? Should I review anything or think about it beforehand? And sometimes it's good to ask either the nominating committee, if your club does that, or the president before you're coming out of the board, what are you guys expecting of me? I'm gonna be prepared for the meetings. I'm going to share my opinions when I think they add value. But what else do you need from me? How else can I serve Sarah? And there's a lot of other Sarahs out there where you might have access to them and they might share things with you that would be beneficial to the board, but they don't feel like they have another avenue or a voice. So you can be that person's voice on the board going forward as well. So a lot of people will see something on the agenda and say, okay, we're gonna do this event and we're gonna wear yellow sashes, and I really don't like yellow sashes for volunteers. I'm gonna vote against that no matter what. It's unethical, it's impractical, and it defeats the purpose of the meeting to come in saying, I'm gonna vote for this or against this no matter what. If we were gonna do that, we could send out a survey, we wouldn't need to have a meeting. The reason we have a meeting is for decisions, deliberation, and discussion. Discussions, deliberation, and decisions. So you want to listen to everyone, and that's not just good practice, that's enshrined in Robert's Rules of Order. We can't have a club say, all right, we're going to make you the delegate for this convention, and no matter what's said, you need to vote against this amendment. That's unethical and impractical, and again, it defeats the purpose of having the meetings. So the agenda, we started this meeting with an agenda, and that's good just so everybody knows why are we here, what are we doing, and what do I need to prepare for today. So usually the president asks for approval of the agenda. It doesn't need a formal vote, but it is good to ask, does anyone have any agenda items? Are there any changes to the agenda? Because some people will say, well, it might make sense if we talk about what we're doing for this fundraiser before we talk about how much we're expecting to give in support of the seminarians this year. So having that input is crucial. Reports to the board. You can make reports to the board as you see fit, but you can't make the decisions, as we talked about earlier. The board is the entity that is the one that sets the agenda and the policy and the course for the organization. But that can be shaped, and it should be shaped, through well-written, well-researched, well-informed reports from members of the board, from committees, and from task forces. And then it's always great if you read the report before you sit down in the board meeting, so you can have those well-thought-out questions in advance. Conflict suddenly happens. You never know when it's going to pop in, but it is part of board meetings. And that is to be expected. These are my children. There's one more picture of them coming. So conflict management is important. There is a lot of power in the ideas that every Serra has. And when we can find a way to have the best idea win, that benefits the organization. And it's our job as leaders to help manage that conflict for the good of the organization. There is a really positive thing that can come from a team of rivals, from groups that see things differently, and that's how you can let the best idea come forward. So you want to have that conflict ordered, structured, with rules. That's how we want things to go, because that's a much more peaceful way to find out who's better at something than just the all-out slugfest that might occur. Some concepts to help with conflict. A failure to agree is not a failure on the part of the board or the president or a member of the board. You can and you should always vote your conscience. So just because everything is not approved unanimously doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It means that people have different opinions, and that's okay. That should also be recorded in the minutes, because years later people might say, oh, we're talking about this, we spent a lot of time deliberating on this issue, but when we came to the vote, there were 12 in favor of it, there were 13 against it, so the motion failed at that time. But boy, was it close, and now things are a little bit different. Maybe it's time to revisit this idea and look at other ways that we can have things move forward. Consensus is great, but it's not critical. You just need a majority of the vote or a supermajority, depending on the kind of vote and what Robert's rules say. So having that conflict is important. But understanding that a difference of opinion over an item or a subject does not make someone your enemy. Just because somebody wears a red tie or a blue tie does not automatically make them a good person or a bad person. A person with different ideas on how things should go, and engaging them in respectful dialogue is the best way to understand where they're coming from, perhaps change their mind, perhaps have that person change your mind. So always keep that in mind, that conflict is not personal. And compromise is not a defeat. As I talked about earlier, the reason we have a meeting, so we can figure out what's the best idea and what's going to best serve the organization. So sometimes it's not, we're gonna wear the red tie, we're gonna wear the blue tie. Maybe the purple tie, the combination of the two is the solution, and that addresses what we need to have happen. So also, just from a very human political standpoint, if you give in a little bit on one issue, there's a chance through the norm of reciprocity that the others on the board will see that, and when you have your impassioned plea for something later on, they'll say, well, they agreed with me on this one, even though they weren't totally in favor of it. Now they seem to really this seems important to them. I'm more willing to hear them out because they were reasonable, so I'm going to be reasonable later. And then you've got to let it go. After the vote is taken, that's the decision, and you move forward. If there's reason to revisit the issue 6 months, a year, 5 years down the road, that's okay. But again, it wasn't a personal issue. It was everyone trying to do what's best for Serra. So setting policy. Policy is something that, again, exists very informally throughout Serra. There is an international policy manual. Many councils have policy manuals, and some clubs have policy manuals. Some clubs have policy manuals and they don't even know them. So they're written 20 or 30 years ago, put in a drawer somewhere, and they're sitting in a box in a garage, and nobody's looked at or reviewed that. So the policy is the guidelines that direct the board and help them say, here's our practice. We're gonna set a policy of, if we have a speaker, we will give them either a stipend of X, or the stipend should be a gift not to exceed the value of this much unless it's a priest, cardinal, bishop, in which case the speaker stipend increases this much. That way there's consistency among the board, and we can say, we've got rules, and we have an understanding of here's how we treat these situations. So there's fairness going forward, and so the treasurer can budget and manage, and people ask, why are we doing this, and why did Father get that and Bishop get that? We can say, it's been our policy. It's always a good idea to, in the policy manual, write down the date that the policy was established, because going to stipends that were set in 1951, the last year or the first year we had the convention here in Kansas City, probably not as impressive as stipends in 2025. So keeping those dates, again, reviewing and updating the policy manual as necessary is important. And it's the board's job to set policy. So you've got to understand the policy, and you've got to spend the time developing, refining, and looking at it. A committee will come in and say, we think we should make this the board's policy, and here's why. And that's great. The committee worked hard on it, but still, as a member, as a leader, it's your job to scrutinize that a little bit and ask questions. Why was this done this way? Could we do this another way? Was this something that the committee, the task force, or the individual giving the report considered when drafting this? So making sure it's effective and that it works is key, and making sure that the policy is written is really critical, because I don't know about you guys, but memories for me tend to fade over time. So having it written down gives us a guarantee that this is what it is. And nowadays, it's wonderful that we have the ability to record everything. I have not, unless it's been absolutely critical, gone back and rewatched a Serra board meeting because we trust that the minutes are correct, and we circulate it. The next, everybody goes, yep, that's what it was. If there's a question, you can go to the recording. Otherwise, you've got the written policy, and that's a much more efficient tool for doing that, because going through a 2-hour board meeting to find out what 30 seconds of policy was is not a good use of your time. Developing policy is a step-by-step process where the wording should be done after the task is defined, after people understand, here's what we're trying to address, here's what we're trying to do. You can see, it's the policy of the club that Cardinal Collins should be at every Serra International board meeting. Okay, that's great, Cardinal Collins is wonderful, but why are we doing that? What are we trying to achieve? Just saying something that sounds good doesn't make sense. You want to spend the time to look at the policy, and again, conflict is part of life. If a policy comes in and there's questions, if you think it's not right, you have the ability to say, can we rework this, can we redraft this, or in some cases, can the committee really take a look at this and submit a new version of it addressing these specific concerns that the board has. Policy is not the bylaws. The bylaws are set in concrete. The policy is ever-changing. It's set by the board, so that can vary from board to board, but it should be those guidelines. Your bylaws are your foundation. Those are the things that should only change when absolutely necessary. Again, it's the job of the board to develop the policy, which means it could be an iterative process. Every year you look and you see what else can we do, how can we make things better, how can we improve this policy so we're more effective as time moves on. So here are my suggested steps for developing policy. And 1, figure out what you need to do. 2, set up an individual, a task force, or a committee to look at that, deliberate the question so the board is fully understanding what we're trying to do through this policy, and then ask, is this consistent with our objectives and purpose of Serra? Does this help us foster and promote vocations? Does it help our members grow in holiness? Is it within the scope of our authority as a board? Because you might have the greatest idea for every altar server in the diocese should wear this kind of cross, and that's great. But as a club, you can't set that policy. It's not within your authority. Is it compatible with all the other policies of the board? This is where it's good to have a bylaws committee or a structures committee that looks at, okay, here's what we have now, here's how we're currently operating. Is this going to upset things? We're gonna have a policy that we do our priest picnic on the second Sunday in June every year. And if the next board comes in and says, we're gonna have a policy that says we're gonna do a sisters picnic on the second Sunday in June every year, not technically conflict, but that could be a problem given the resources in most clubs. Is it enforceable? Do we have a way of making sure that this happens in the future? And finally, again, we've got to ask, is it affordable? Is this something that we can do within the budget of our club? So committees are designed to do the work that needs to be done, but is not best suited for a board meeting. Doing the research, deliberating issues, drafting documents, those are all things that should be done outside of the board meeting so they can be presented to the board beforehand, discussed and deliberated. And then sometimes you might want to have a committee just to look at and research and understand an issue. How does the propaedeutic year work within our diocese? And what does the bishop want there? How do you say the word propaedeutic? Special groups just to get out there and understand, what does this mean for us and how can we be a part of it? And that's where committees are great. So service on the committees is not limited just to subject matter experts. It's good to have people with deep knowledge present, but sometimes having that lay enthusiastic person on there brings in another perspective, and that can help shape how the policy is drafted in either practical implementation or, like I said, bringing in some of that outside knowledge to let the best ideas win and flow forward. Committees have no power. So Serra International Convention Committee, they recommended that we have a convention in Kansas City, and they worked with the local team here. We found this great hotel, and we set up a beautiful mass at the cathedral. But the convention committee doesn't have the authority to do any of that or to bind Serra. They've got to present to the board so the board knows what's going on and understands the potential benefits and risks of doing this event, and then the board decides what happens.
John, is the committee members of the board or members of the club?
It can be both, and there's technically nothing that says non-Serrans can't be on a committee. Might be a good way of harpooning a potential member and drawing them in. So they don't technically need to be a Serran, but there should be a reason as to why they're on the committee. Subject matter expertise, enthusiasm, resources, connections, those are all things to consider as the committees are being put together. Very good question, thank you. All right, committees are accountable to the board, so that means that the committee should report to the board on a regular basis, and there should be a standing agenda item, reports from committees. If you want to be really organized, put the names of the committees that are reporting in each board agenda, so everybody knows, okay, as a treasurer, I am the chair of the finance committee, I need to report to the board. As the programs VP, I need to report on what the events are and what the programs committee is doing. And that way everybody stays accountable and knows what's expected of them at those board meetings. Board members who are not on the committee, they can ask questions, they can dig in, they can be part of that deliberative process, even though they didn't sit through all the committee meetings. And they say, well, why are we at the Marriott instead of a Hyatt or the Sheraton or whatever? You're free to ask those questions as a member of the board, and again, scrutinize what the committee is doing to ensure that that's being done in the best interest of Serra. There's two different kinds of general types of committee. There's standing committees that exist in perpetuity, and then there's ad hoc committees. And I'll continue with my convention example. Serra International has a standing convention committee, so the institutional knowledge of the conventions move forward from year to year. But we also set up a local committee. And I'm going to say this a lot this week, so get ready for it. But the local committee here in Kansas City is phenomenal. They have done an amazing job, and they've worked well with the standing committee of Serra International. So we get the local expertise, the boots on the ground knowledge, and the organizational information. So those two can come together in a really successful way. But the local committee here is an ad hoc committee. Come Sunday, they're going to go back to doing the great things that they do for Serra, and then the local committee for Indianapolis, Indiana is going to continue planning for next year. So standing committees exist and go on in perpetuity. Ad hoc committees are built for a specific purpose. And when the board is deliberating and deciding what they need, it's a good idea to figure out, should this be a standing committee that exists for a long time, or should this be an ad hoc committee where we're going to talk to the vocation director and the bishop, figure out, what are we doing for the propedeutic year, and maybe build some policy and some programming around that. And then once that's established, the committee can be dissolved or folded into another committee that is a standing committee. All right, and then task forces are different from committees. The terms are often used interchangeably. Task forces just study an issue and give a report. If the report's accepted, then that's the end of the task force. If there is a need, if there's other questions, the board may say, we'd like the task force to update their report and consider these factors. So, let's see. The executive committee is a function of most Serra boards, and that is usually the titled officers or the non-trustee officers. Oftentimes the club, council, international bylaws will empower the executive committee to act with the authority of the board, except for certain situations. And those all should be spelled out in the bylaws. The reason that exists is because some clubs and some entities have boards of 15, 20, 30 people, and it's not practical to call those all of those people together when there is an action or when there's an item that needs quick action. So the executive committee can serve in the capacity of the board, barring those limited circumstances. And then as a member of a committee, your responsibilities are similar to that of a board, but more involved. You need to be very serious. You've got to do all the things you do for a board meeting, but usually a lot more work because you're coming in and you're doing research, you're thinking about what's happening. And you want to be ready to be a participative and constructive member of those committees as you move forward. Making motions. So getting into the Roberts Rulesy section of the agenda, which also means coming close to the end. A motion is a formal request to the board. And motions can be, I move that we adjust our policy so that stipends are adjusted per inflation every 5 years. Or I move that we review this so that we have a standing committee to look at how we can best serve the propedeutic year within the diocese. And then once a motion is made and seconded, then the motion should be discussed. And this is, I'll say it's a Serra tradition that shouldn't exist, but oftentimes someone will make a motion and then there will be a lot of discussion about it, and then there will be a second, and then there will be more discussion about it. And that is inefficient for a number of reasons. Sometimes if someone makes a motion, if nobody wants to talk about that, don't second it, the motion dies for lack of a second, and then you don't need to have that discussion later on. And then if somebody makes a motion and there's a second, and you're opposed to it, then the discussion section is your opportunity to talk about why you think this isn't right, or this isn't the proper time, or within our purview as Serrans. So making sure you have the proper protocol is important. This is part of my Robert's Rules cheat sheet. All these slides will be emailed out to everybody. Also, this session will be posted on YouTube, so I see people taking pictures. That's great. I've also gone back and tried to read pictures of slides that I've taken, and it's not the best, which is why we'll send out a comprehensive packet afterwards. So I won't go through all of this except for just talking about the top line. So if you want to do something, you say the magic words below. Sometimes you're allowed to interrupt, sometimes you're not. Sometimes a second is required, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the items are up for debate, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're open to amendment. And amendments to motions are common because sometimes once a motion is made and seconded and the discussion ensues, people will say, well, we really think a sister's appreciation would be great, but doing it the same day as a priest appreciation lunch is going to stretch us too far, it's going to be a little too difficult. So could we move it from the second Sunday in June to the second Sunday in May, the month of Mary? That's good for the sisters. Is that something we're open to? If the person who made the motion is open to that, they can agree to the amendment, and the seconder also needs to agree, and that way you can not go through the process of withdrawing the motion or voting the motion down and restarting the whole section. You've also got here whether or not, or what percentage of the vote is required for different things. Point of privilege is, and point of comfort is something that I think is important because oftentimes, I would say point of privilege, it's cold in this room. Can we adjust the thermostat? And maybe that needs a little discussion. So these, again, I'm not going to bore you going through all of these. Everybody here can read, so we'll move on through that. We talked about how voting works, and then one of the most important things is once the vote is taken, the president says the ayes have it, the nays have it. If it's a contentious vote, it's good to, as I mentioned earlier, record 12 in favor, 13 against, motion is defeated, put that in the minutes, and then you move on. You talk about the next thing. We've got so much work to do as Serrans. We can't dwell on these, and we have to trust the wisdom of the board, the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and our fellow Serrans, that everybody's acting in the best interest of the organization. Thank you so much. God bless. Have a wonderful convention.